This is Small Business Conversations with Akona Machoba, unlocking essential advice, opinions, and key issues that affect South Africa's small business community.
Welcome to yet another edition of the Small Business Conversations podcast, Moneyweb's weekly SME show highlighting critical issues affecting South Africa's small business environment. This week on the pod, we look at the mounting risks facing small businesses. I mean, it's no secret that the operating environment for business is tougher now than arguably ever before. We've seen numerous reports on how load shedding is driving operating costs through the roof. Advances in technology, on the other hand, coming along with their own baggage in terms of cyber attacks, cybersecurity concerns. Freshest in our memory, of course, are the extreme changes in climate. We've seen the real-time effects of this in KwaZulu-Natal with all those floods that took place just a few months ago, and in the Eastern Cape, the floods and the drought there. But how does all of this affect the business insurance landscape and the insurer's appetite to keep guarding SMEs against these mounting risks? Joining me to share some insights on this is the CEO of Integri Brokers, Hermanus van der Linde. Welcome to the pod, Hermanus. Glad to have you.
Hi, thanks so much. Good to be here. Yes, on this very, very cold Johannesburg morning.
Very cold Johannesburg morning indeed, and we will definitely touch on the climate and how that's changing for business, certainly. Hermanus, I've mentioned in my intro just the potential challenges facing businesses currently, and that's just to name a few. But can you add to that and run us through the leading threats to small businesses in the country that you have seen operating in that insurance space?
You touched on a lot of them. I think that, inflation obviously is killing us. The exchange rate's killing us. Interest rates are killing us for those of us who own property and so on and so on. So it's a tough environment in South Africa at the moment. But I could also tell you that globally, it's quite tough at the moment. If you go and look at what inflation is in other countries, you'll find that Australia beats South Africa by solid 2 points. So it's not easy globally at the moment. And, all of that translates eventually to pressure on the consumer. So if our clients are suffering, we're suffering. And that, I suppose, is the most daunting thing for us in South Africa. But I could tell you that I think that some of the risks that businesses face in South Africa that are being ignored, and the most threatening ones to businesses in South Africa, must be cybercrime. I think that businesses typically underestimate the impact that cybercrime could have on their business and has had. We've seen studies where 94% of all businesses in South Africa have been attacked somewhere in the last 12 months. 94% of all businesses have been attacked somewhere in the last 12 months. And so I think there are some problems in understanding, what that threat really is. People think that it's a network of Eastern European hackers sitting in dark, dodgy clubs who are experts at breaking code into your systems. And it might very well be that, but it might also be a dude down the street that's just cracked your Wi-Fi and is now masking everything you do and gathering your credit card information. It could also be a guy sending an email to your head of HR, which has happened to us a couple of times, to your head of HR, pretending to be you, asking them to change your salary account details.
I'm wondering then, how do small businesses protect themselves against such threats? We know working for a business that there are certain trainings that you might need to do. You need to understand that this could be a threat, identify a spam. Is that something that is being practiced by small businesses to protect themselves? Is it working?
I don't think the awareness is quite up yet. I honestly don't think that small businesses are aware enough about cybercrime. Although, if you look globally, the second biggest concern that CEOs have globally is cybercrime. The biggest concern is skill shortage. I do think that it's something that small businesses need to educate themselves on and start venturing out into the market, try and find reputable brokers to give them advice on how they could mitigate the potential financial losses that you could suffer from a cyber breach. And some of these breaches, I've explained some of the simple ones, phishing attacks and so on, but some of them could get quite complex. If, for example, a cyber criminal could convince one of your staff to reset their password through a web page that looks 100% like your web page, like your online or even your intranet. And he could convince that staff member that this is a requirement from your IT team to re-log in or reset your password. And he could get them to give him what their current password is. then they could log into your systems, and then they place files in strategic places in your systems that encrypt your data. And that typical attack is then a ransomware attack. And what that means is that they will then be in contact with you saying, look, we've taken control of your data. And if you want the key to unlock your data or unlock your systems, you have to pay us. And so that's quite a common attack.
Cyber attacks are obviously criminal activity, and it's just a more sophisticated, I guess, level of criminality. And I'm just concerned about the commercial crime in the country. How is that affecting businesses? You mentioned crime stats and how those are playing into the risks that face small businesses.
Absolutely. I think, South Africa is quite crippled by crime in every sector. And I think that that's part of the challenge, and small businesses need to be vigilant and be aware. But I think that as South Africans, we're well aware of what those risks are in terms of most SMEs have vehicles. They have some vehicles in their operation, whether it's just a delivery vehicle or a fleet of vehicles. They have vehicles, and vehicles pose a huge threat regarding the criminality aspect. But the losses when it comes to a vehicle being stolen is tolerable. And we typically insure for that. I don't see that as the sort of threat that would cripple your business, unless it's a very small business and you're just a startup and starting up. That could cripple your business. So you need to be sure to speak to an intermediary that can help you to find the best products, because insurance products are not all the same and they weren't designed with the same market in mind. And so, speaking to an insurer directly is likely not the best thing for you to do, because that insurer will be selling the products that they've designed. And what you need some advice. You need somebody who knows a couple of different products and has experience with them to be able to advise you on how to cover that risk most effectively.
Sure. And Armanas, I'm just wondering here, we are almost 2 years now. I think we are actually in that 2-year mark of the July unrest. And that was something that emanated from political events, some would say, that took place in our country. And I'm just wondering how much of a risk is political activity to small businesses in terms of the coverage space? Is that something that people need to be concerned about, seeing what we saw with the July unrest, for example?
Absolutely. That is something that people need to be concerned about. It is also something that you could cover quite easily, relatively easily, through the government insurance program called SASRIA. SASRIA, specifically civil unrest cover. And you need to make sure that that cover is in place and that you have that should something like that happen to you. It's absolutely devastating. Can you imagine being looted? If you're a business owner, you're a retail owner and you're looted, it could really be devastating. So nonetheless, but you can buy cover for that. Prices have increased quite dramatically, specifically on that cover. We heard over 1,000% after that particular spate of looting. But I think that civil unrest for that cover, what it ultimately does, this is what's so bad about this situation, is that the more of these sorts of events we have, the more difficult it becomes for insurers to maintain reasonable premiums, because their reinsurance cost is going through the roof. And what that essentially is insurers reinsure some of their really big risks. And they have to do that because they have to ensure that they can continue to pay claims and won't fold. And so when they reinsure those risks, they do this with reinsurance companies worldwide to spread the risk, and they have to ensure that they get enough attention from those companies. And those companies, obviously, like anybody, the reason why we're in business is for profits. And so they want to be in that business for profits. And when we see a series of things go wrong in South Africa the way that they have, with the looting, with the rains that we had in KZN, the floods, when we see a series of those things, then those reinsurers become a little bit not so interested because they're concerned about their profits. And then the only way that you could get them to the table is for them to raise their prices. And so that directly translates to our costs. Your premium goes up because of reinsurance costs.
I'm glad you mentioned the costs and the attitude of insurers. I'm really interested, as someone who is constantly engaging with insurers and consumers, businesses, you have the privilege of monitoring the trends in real time in terms of how the landscape is changing. Can you just give a brief analysis of how the insurance landscape has changed from the insurers' pricing, the appetite for businesses to take up insurance? Are you seeing there is more businesses taking up insurance because of maybe the events of the July civil unrest, or people are reluctant because they can't afford it?
I think people are becoming more and more reluctant. For personal insurance, they're becoming more and more reluctant because it is becoming more expensive, which you can understand. I don't think that the insurance premiums at the moment are expensive enough for people to warrant not taking insurance. The rates that we see, and we work on rates, so we work on a percentage of the risk as premium paid. And I don't think that those percentages are quite completely out of whack. So people should still be taking insurance. Although we see in the more sensitive parts of the market, the more price sensitive parts of the market where the economy hits them hardest, that people are climbing off cover or opting for cheaper cover. What I mean by cheaper cover is also then cheaper quality cover. So cover that's more restrictive and doesn't offer them all of the risk mitigating solutions that some of the more comprehensive covers do. What we've also seen from insurers, and you were asking that question about the trend regarding insurers and their appetite, is that there are some risks developing in South Africa that are just not tolerable for insurers given their current structures. Some of those risks, for example, is load shedding. I say load shedding is a risk, it's not really a risk, but the resulting damage caused by your local municipality switching power on and off at varying frequencies and currents. The challenge with that is, things are in such an absolute disarray when it comes to the power grid that when municipalities switch on after load shedding, sometimes spikes come through, surges. Sometimes you'd find, and I found it personally at my own home, where of the 3 phases that we get, all 3 of those phases have now been moved to 1 phase. And so you're getting a ridiculous amount of current on one of your phases and nothing on the others. And then they soon rectify it and fix it. But what this does to your electronic appliances is just chaos. It screws up everything. That's a risk that insurers in their current structure, and I say in their current structure because in theory, any risk is insurable. The question is at what price? That's always the question. And so currently, that's just not insurable. And so we see insurers climbing off risk for those covers. Load shedding in excess of 12 hours, resulting damage to your property, your home, your electronics not covered. You specifically have to opt for power surge cover, which would then have to be proven outside of a load shedding period, which is very, very hard to do, and so on and so forth. We also see insurers regarding the crime and the massive increase in vehicle theft. We see insurers opting for 2 or 3 tracking devices in certain vehicle cases. Most stolen vehicles are being cloned and resold into the market, but the expensive ones are not being resold into our marketplace. They're actually being moved across the border. And so insurers then insist for more tracking devices, and they're making it harder for the consumer to buy insurance, honestly. But understandably so.
You mentioned a lot of maybe the personal side of it, but in terms of business insurance, I'm thinking of the trucking industry now. There's sporadic events happening in parts of the country where certain trucks are being set alight, and I'm wondering the impact of that for businesses in terms of coverage. How does that affect them, and how does it affect their premiums and how they're paying?
It absolutely does. Every claim that an insurer or the insurance industry pays that was outside of the normal expected claims translates back to your premiums. Because in the next run, we will need to increase premiums because the risk is fundamentally changed. If trucks are being burned at the rate that they are, then insurance premiums must go up to cover that. And so we're all paying for it. All of us are paying for it, which is why premiums are what they are. We often are asked by our clients why premiums go up. If their vehicle value, for example, did not go up, it went down. And the fact is that the replacement cost of that vehicle or that truck is only a part of the risk. The biggest part of the risk is most likely the Ferrari that you just drove into. That's the biggest part of the risk. Your vehicle's risk is actually quite controllable in terms of what the risks are. And so they also go up because sometimes, just on that topic, as vehicles get older, parts become harder to find on those vehicles and thus more expensive. And eventually, when you have a really, really old vehicle, there just aren't any parts available. So if you have a small accident with that vehicle will be written off. And so because of that, your insurance as a percentage of your vehicle value is probably higher. But still, it's one of those things. I encourage people to take insurance and mitigation of financial losses through financial services products seriously and see it as a method to protect everything that they built.
So rather safe than sorry in that case.
Absolutely.
I'm just wondering, with insurers, you mentioned that there's certain risks that maybe there's not enough appetite from them. How are insurers innovating to cater to small businesses' needs in terms of the products and changing up their offerings to make sure that they still cover those people that need cover and that are willing to come and take a product or two?
I think the most important part when it comes to the innovation to support small businesses has to be working through intermediary. Just imagine for a moment, I don't know if you have a solar solution or a sort of off-grid solution at home, but I recently had to go through that process and realized how little I know about all of the different offerings in the market. And each one of those providers would come do a survey and they would insist that their solution is the best solution that there is. And my challenge soon became discerning which are good solutions and which aren't, And that's really hard because you don't have any evidence. And if you go search online, there are always people who love it and people who hate it. And it's very, very hard. And so ultimately, what I would have appreciated in that market space was for somebody who has experience across multiple products or providers to come and give me an honest opinion and say, this is what I recommend you do because from my experience, this is best. And so that's first and foremost what you have to do. You have to speak to someone who sells a multitude of products and has experience with varying insurers. Because you have to also remember that when it comes to claims, insurers have different claim approaches or claims philosophies. And so some insurers might, because of the market, the specific market that they are targeting with a specific product, might be very understanding of certain circumstances that led to a claim. Other insurers might not, even though they have that product and you bought that product, their approach to handling the claim might not be as favorable when it comes to giving you the benefit of the doubt as some other insurers might be. And so you need an intermediary that helps you with that. I think that insurers have really, as the market conditions change, they adapt. And they have to adapt because we're all in sales. All of us, even the businesses that we serve, are in sales. We're all in the process of selling and trying to grow our businesses. And as that happens, it's such a beautiful thing to see how the market conditions dictate what those insurers and businesses do. And the ones that ultimately won't survive are the ones that stick to their guns and will not adapt or innovate according to the market conditions. And so, I could tell you that insurers are adapting. The larger insurers definitely are adapting and providing solutions for businesses, and because that's the way that they're going to stay in business.
And finally, Hermanus, just before we end off our conversation, I'm just interested on the future of business insurance and what that is looking like. What are the looming threats now beyond what you have mentioned that maybe business owners should be preparing for and also trying to get ahead of to ensure that maybe they get a certain cover to ensure that if something does happen of any certain threatening nature, that they are covered and they saw it coming?
Yes, I think that the most important things in business insurance is look at your cyber risks. Don't underestimate those risks. They could be devastating for you and your business. And then, if you're large enough as a business, you have to put together a risk committee. If you can, put together a group of people who you think are forward-looking and have the ability to look at the business holistically and determine, where potential risks are for you because they might not be insurable. Some risks are just not insurable. There aren't products for that. But then, once you've done that, then speak to a broker. That's my best advice, is say speak to a broker. It's not because I am a broker, because I've seen the benefit of speaking to a broker. It doesn't cost you extra either. Those costs, the commission earnings that brokers earn, they're paid by insurers for performing a specific task that if you had to speak to the insurer directly, the insurer would perform that task and it would cost them the same. And so there's no extra cost in speaking to an intermediary or broker. And we spoke about the market conditions and how you have to adapt to those conditions. And I encourage people to just really be aware of what your chosen target market are needing and adapt to those needs as quickly as you can. That's how you stay a little bit ahead of the wave. And especially in South Africa, it's very, very important.
And that right there is Hermanus van der Linde of IntegriSure Brokers, telling us just about the threats that face small businesses at the current environment, highlighting cyber attacks as one of the biggest threats that SMEs have to battle. Thank you once again for joining us on the show, Hermanus.
Thanks so much for having me. It was fun.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and follow Small Business Conversations, and don't forget to share our episodes. If you want to contribute to the conversation, you can tweet me at machoba_a, or you can email us at smepodcast@moneyweb.co.za to share your thoughts and suggestions for future conversations. Until next time, thank you, goodbye.
You've been listening to Small Business Conversations with Akona Machoba. To listen to more Moneyweb podcasts, go to moneyweb.co.za, the Moneyweb app, or your favorite podcast platforms. Moneyweb, your trusted source for business and investment insights.